So, I am Josh Lamb, and this is my project on the Civil War. Actually, I can take my mask off. Important names for this presentation. So, this beautiful man over here is General Robert E. Lee, and this guy is General Ulysses S. Grant, and they were both very big, high-powered generals in the Civil War. Robert E. Lee for the Confederacy and Ulysses S. Grant for the Union. And Abraham Lincoln, well, the war was pretty much his fault. That's why the South got angry. And that's what pushed them over the edge. So I blame him for the deadliest war in America's history. Well, the only civil war in America's history. The election of Abraham Lincoln. So here's where I'm going to talk about him triggering the South. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican presidential candidate. He won the election of 1860, and that triggered the South and pretty much is what caused the war to begin, because they were not happy that a Northerner president was going to try and end slavery. Eventually, after the war ended, he got shot by John Wilkes Booth for doing this. The Union States were also known as the Northern States, which, given by the name, were made up of the states in the North. And the North had more of an industrial economy, so mostly for like factories and big cities, unlike the South. And so because they had the big cities and all the factories and machines and everything, they didn't need slaves, so they were kind of against it. And they were fighting to abolish it in the war. Now, you may be wondering why I have all of these flags up here, right? So when the Civil War first started, this is what the American flag looked like. And during the Civil War, we were also still expanding the country a little bit. So we got a few more states, and then they changed it to this. Not long after, we got even more states, and they changed it to this, and the same thing happened here. The Southern states. So the Confederate States of America, also known as the South, again given by, the region that called themselves the Confederate States of America. So the Southern economy was more farmland, and they farmed more, like cotton was a very big one. Another one that a lot of people grew back then was tobacco. And those were just the most popular ones because they made the most money, and that's where the slaves came into play. They would work those plantations. And the Southerners thought that it was acceptable because socially back then it was acceptable, but even though it wasn't right. So if that teaches us anything, just because something is socially all right doesn't mean that it's actually great for you or for everybody else, because it could still be wrong. And you might be wondering what these flags all are. And didn't the Confederate flag look like just that? No. This was the original Confederate flag. They called it the Bonnie Blue flag. And eventually, I don't remember exactly why, but they changed it to this. And after they changed it to this, they realized it looked way too much like the American flag. So then they changed it to this. And the reason they changed it to the Southern Cross in the top and the rest of it white was mainly because they were a bunch of white supremacists and they wanted a white flag. But not too long before the war actually ended, they had to change it to this because this looked like way too much of a surrender flag. And I think it was like 2 weeks before the war ended, they added the red bar to the flag. Slavery. So, slaves were a big part of why the war happened and all the drama between the North and the South back then. So yeah, the slaves would work plantations and they lived in housing pretty much like that. They didn't have very well kept up diets or good housekeeping or anything really. And they were worked to death all day just to wake up the next day and do it again. And some of the punishments were kind of ridiculous for trying to run away. Like they'd chop toes off, bunch of crazy stuff. If they weren't working hard enough, the overseer would crack the whip and, be a jerk to the slaves, which they definitely did not deserve. Um, but where did slaves come from originally? And that would be for these slaves, it would be Africa. Um, and pretty much what happened was the white man would go over to Africa by boat and buy pretty much I think it was like prisoners of war from other African tribes, but they would like the African tribes would take members from other tribes and sell them as slaves. And the white man was like, you know what, we'll do it. And they went over to Africa and shipped back boats full of Africans. And there was quite a few that wouldn't even make it back to the United States. And the rest of the slaves just had to deal with it, the dead bodies while they were there. In conclusion, at the end of the war, General E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant on April 9th, 1965, at a courthouse in Virginia. Ulysses S. Grant later went on to become President of the United States, and for General Robert E. Lee, he got a cool car named after him. That was about it. And that wouldn't happen for another little over 100 years. These are my genre pieces. I did a timeline of like important battles that happened and other important things. So yeah, you could take a look at that. So this wasn't like a historically accurate schedule of what their days would look like, but I thought if I was a general in the Civil War, this is what it would look like to me, at least for what I researched. Again, the times could be off, but that's pretty much what they did. And then I made posters for my other genre pieces from the Uncle Sam poster that didn't happen until World War II, but if they had those in the South, or not in the South, in the States in the 1800s for the Civil War, that's probably what they would look like. This one for the South and that one for the North. Those are my sources. I definitely have more to put in there, but they're not in there yet. Um, Thank you for watching. Just kidding. They didn't have tanks back then.